From ABC, this is a special edition of World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Good evening. In the Middle East today, the U.S. used fighters and fighter bombers. The Iraqis used Scud missiles and oil. The U.S. High Command says there have been more attacks on Iraq and Kuwait in the last 24 hours than on any other day since the war began. As for the Iraqis, they have opened a pipeline, and according to the U.S., are pouring millions of gallons of oil straight into the Persian Gulf. They have also successfully attacked Saudi Arabia and Israel again with their missiles. We begin with ABC's Dean Reynolds, who's in Tel Aviv.
There was a frightening duel in the sky over Israel tonight. Patriot missile interceptors creasing the darkness in search of Scuds, and turning one shock from Iraq into so many shafts of light. But some of the Scuds were only deflected. When 8 to 10 of them fell to earth, they did real damage, both in Tel Aviv and in Haifa. And several of the Patriots found nothing at all, vainly skimming the horizon until crashing back toward the people and property they were supposed to protect. Watch this slow, arcing Patriot scour the clouds for a target before suddenly dropping like a rock on Tel Aviv. The Army explanation was not reassuring to Israelis.
Sometimes a Patriot missile may run into the wrong place, or even as a result of some technical error, it should go down into the earth.
The Army said it was too early to say whether the Scuds or the errant Patriots did most of the damage. On the ground, there was bedlam. Houses were blasted, cars set ablaze, people bloodied.
The bombs, the big bombs. All my body was moving.
Most of the roofs are damaged. Everything in the house is broken.
Authorities say one person was killed and at least 60 injured. And as dogs searched for anyone still missing tonight, Israelis were asking a straightforward question. Israeli officials say they are balancing two competing considerations as they weigh their response to Iraq. How much this country can gain from its policy of restraint versus the need to address the growing concerns for public safety. Dean Reynolds, ABC News, Tel Aviv.
Saudi Arabia came under another missile attack as well. One Iraqi Scud was destroyed in the air by a Patriot missile over the Saudi capital, Riyadh, but a second one sheared off part of a 6-story building. One person may have died. An unknown number were injured. In 9 days of war, according to the U.S. High Command, Iraq has now launched 44 Scud missiles, 24 at Saudi Arabia, 20 at Israel. The Pentagon won't give numbers, but it's believed the U.S. has fired at least twice that number of Patriot missiles trying to intercept the Scuds. Which raises the question, will the U.S. run out of Patriots before the Iraqis run out of Scuds? Here's our Pentagon correspondent, Bob Zelnick.
Pentagon officials privately expressed concern that the stock of advanced Patriot missiles is dangerously low. Sources here now place the number of these U.S. Patriots in the theater at less than 500. The first generation of Patriots was designed to destroy attacking aircraft, not missiles. But 5 months ago, anticipating the possibility of war in the Persian Gulf, the Army ordered the contractor, Raytheon, to begin producing the more advanced anti-missile version as soon as possible. According to industry sources, Raytheon has been producing the new Patriots at the rate of 100 to 200 per month. But sources here say the arithmetic of war now favors Iraq, which is believed to have between 350 and 1,000 Scud missiles facing those 500 Patriots. And 2 Patriots are often fired at a single incoming Scud. But Iraq has relatively few mobile launches left for its Scuds, so the U.S. priority remains finding and destroying them. Once the launchers are gone, all the Scuds in the Iraqi arsenal will be of little use. Bob Zelnick, ABC News at the Pentagon.
Once again, the U.S. has accused Iraq of mindlessly using oil as a weapon. It says the Iraqis have opened a pipeline and are dumping oil into the Persian Gulf at the rate of more than 4 million gallons a day. On the potential effect, here's ABC's Ned Potter.
The oil was so thick it gurgled as it washed onto the Gulf shoreline. It coated seabirds, sent fumes high into the air, and provoked angry words from the president about Saddam Hussein.
Now he resorts to enormous environmental damage, but in terms of turning loose a lot of oil, no military advantage to him whatsoever in this. It's not going to help him at all, absolutely not.
The Pentagon said the crude oil was apparently being released from an export terminal off the Kuwaiti coast. It had mostly spread toward the Saudi shoreline from there, carried by local currents.
This is clearly an act of environmental terrorism, and it's likely to be more than a dozen times bigger than the Alaska oil spill at BAGHDAD.
Military sources say oil on the shoreline would not greatly hamper a ground assault because oil spills are hard to set on fire and most troops would likely land by helicopter or hovercraft. But heavy equipment like tanks might be hampered. The Pentagon said it's already at work on ways around the problem. Environmentalists and pollution experts had other concerns in mind. The Sierra Club, for instance, said the dumping could destroy the Gulf for decades, limiting fishing and the food supply. And if it spread far enough down the Gulf, the oil could clog desalination plants that supply most of the region's drinking water.
This is a situation where the spillage is intentional, deliberate, and as a result, it could continue for as long as the hostilities continue. As a result, it has the potential for becoming one of the most severe environmental disasters in history.
Late today, an oil spill cleanup firm in Texas confirmed it has received a call from the Saudi government for help in clearing its beaches. Ned Potter, ABC News, Washington.
Still in the Middle East, 4 more attacks today apparently related to the war. In the Greek capital Athens, bombs went off at 3 banks, 2 U.S. and 1 British, and at the home of the French military attaché. There was some damage. No one was hurt. The State Department has added India to the list of countries where it thinks...
Development this evening, the United States and the Soviet Union are offering Saddam Hussein a ceasefire if Saddam Hussein takes what are called immediate steps to pull out of Kuwait. You may want to note, as some others have, that 1, President Bush has said previously there wasn't going to be any pause, and 2, that insofar as anyone can determine, it is not necessary for Saddam Hussein to actually be out of Kuwait, but just begin pulling out of Kuwait. It's unclear exactly what is meant by this. So far, Saddam has shown no inclination to get out of Kuwait at all. In the war today, the Allies reported a big victory. Bombers took out an enemy convoy in the desert of southern Iraq. 24 Iraqi tanks, armored personnel carriers, and supply vehicles, we are told, were destroyed by U.S. Marines. At the end of the second week of war, the pace is picking up. During the last 24 hours, the Allies have reported flying 2,600 air missions, many of them bombing Iraqi troops massed in southern Iraq and inside Kuwait. Is it making a difference?
We're doing some damage. I can't quantify that for you, but we're seeing effects. We're definitely seeing effects of their morale, of their capability suffering under that attack.
Iraq's Air Force has continued its exodus to Iran, landing dozens of planes at airstrips there, and while the move is confusing, the Pentagon says it considers it good news.
They have fled the battlefield. They probably don't have a lot of ordnance with them. They don't have their maintenance facilities with them. Therefore, it is more difficult for them to participate in a battle. So from my perspective, yes, I see it as a net plus for the coalition.
CBS News Defense Department correspondent David Martin is standing by at the Pentagon. David, give us the latest.
Well, Dan, you mentioned that convoy, which apparently was destroyed by U.S. airstrikes, and that sort of epitomizes the dilemma that Saddam Hussein faces here. If he keeps his troops hunkered down, the Allies are just going to keep bombing day after day with no end in sight. But on the other hand, if he tells his troops to come out of their bunkers and go on the offensive, they expose themselves to just the kind of airstrike which wiped out that convoy.
David, what are we to make of Saddam's decision to move all of those airplanes, possibly as many as 100 or more, into Iran?
Well, I think Saddam basically faced the same dilemma with his Air Force that he faces with his ground forces. If those aircraft came out of their shelters and fought, they would be destroyed by Allied warplanes. If they stayed in their shelters, they'd be destroyed by Allied warplanes. It would just take a little longer. His answer to that problem appears to be to move his planes, his best planes, to Iran. And I suppose the equivalent move with ground forces would be to start pulling back his Republican Guards.
David Martin at the Pentagon. Fuad Ajami, our Middle Eastern expert, said earlier this evening on the evening news that what Iran is doing is providing garage space for the Iraqi aircraft. CBS News correspondent Eric Ingberg has been out with U.S. ground troops quite a bit in the deserts of Saudi Arabia. Eric joins us now from Saudi Arabia. Eric?
Dan, wars change, but sergeants don't. There was a top sergeant who was speaking to the troops of an artillery unit that I spent some time with as they were preparing to move north to a position that would take them within range of the Iraqi guns. "I know you're scared," he told them, and then paused. Then with great certitude, he added, "It's good that you're scared. It means you're thinking." It is a thinking army that America has assembled in the desert. You can spend days with American troops and never hear a word of hatred or disregard for the Iraqi people. There are no ethnic slurs for the Iraqis as have developed in other wars, no Charlie, no terms of derision. And also, there is no cocky expectation of an easy victory. In the last few days, thousands of these troops and the machines which support them have moved into new positions in the northern desert to prepare to assault Iraq and Kuwait. The convoys stretch for miles. They run round the clock. The vast movement, rivaling World War II's D-Day, has brought home the nearness of combat to the troops.
We're probably about as far forward as any Americans are right now, I would guess. And there's a certain amount of pride that comes from that more than anything else. We're ready. That's about all I can tell you. And only time will tell how ready, but we're ready.
We've been here already about 4 months already, and we'd rather go ahead and fight and try to go home the best way we can and stay here another 5 months and just sit around.
It is an army that, unique in American military experience, has had 5 months to get used to the climate and the terrain. One American general told me, when we first arrived on this desert, it seemed lonely and forbidding. Now we regard it as home. My impression was that the enlisted men do not regard it as a home. But the American troops who are massing on the border of Kuwait and Iraq know that the road home leads north. And they are preparing to go through Iraq and Kuwait to get there. Dan?
Eric, I know as part of your coverage you spent many hours in chemical protective gear. What do we make of these artillery exchanges, and are the troops fearful that Saddam will put chemical weapons in some of the artillery shells?
The one threat that you hear the American troops speak about with great trepidation is the possibility that they will be hit with chemical weapons. They have a uniquely American term for this, Dan. They talk about being slimed by Iraqi artillery shells, which means that they're not so afraid of it that they aren't prepared to use little word games in talking about it. But they also say that they're confident in the equipment that they've been issued, the gas masks, the protective suits, and that they believe that they can enter a battle in which chemical weapons are being used and surviving. Whether or not Saddam is going to use those chemical weapons against them is a subject of constant discussion amongst the troops, and they appear to be as confused about what his intentions are as the leaders in Washington are.
Combat correspondent Eric Ingberg, who's been far forward with ground troops. Thanks, Eric. Jim Stewart, who also works the Pentagon for us, has prepared a report on the possibility of a ground war.
Ground warfare, the mother of all battles in Saddam Hussein's words, may be only days away in the Persian Gulf, pitting armies totaling 1 million men and 7,000 tanks against each other in a thunderous collision.
If you're hit with it suddenly, then it's a great shock. And it's going to be a great shock to every soldier that's never been in combat before.
Allied forces will likely telegraph their intentions on the ground with massive artillery barrages, salvos of ground-to-ground missiles, sweeps of aerial carpet bombing.
The first purpose of a ground attack would be to get them to come out of those holes and out of those defensive positions in order to counterattack.
The aim is to force Iraq to wage a different war from the one it fought with Iran for 8 years, where static battle lines, intricate fortifications, and frontal assaults were the rule, and air power played little or no role.
He's got the other side comes out of his holes, and there's a pitched battle, tanks versus tanks. Both sides will have a lot of help, but our tanks will have a lot more help.
U.S. Apache helicopters will range ahead of the advancing Allied troops. seeking out Iraqi tanks and fortified positions. And roaring through the maze of Iraqi obstacles, trenches and minefields, echelons of brigade-sized units of tanks, with each tank commander locked in a race for survival.
You're being thrown around the whole time as you hit from sand dune to sand dune, chucked around, while all of this is happening under the constant threat that out there is a tank that is looking for you.
It is these 67-ton monsters that seek to be the king of the land battle in the Persian Gulf War. The United States M1A1 has the clear technical advantage over the Iraqi Soviet-made T-72, which because of its oversized cannon and automatic shell loader has a fearsome reputation in more ways than one.
The mechanical system wants to load the ammunition, but if anybody gets in its way, they're liable to load him instead.
Allied ground forces are expected to make a sweeping flank attack on the Iraqis, striking far to the west in an effort to isolate Saddam Hussein's elite Republican guards and cut off the forces in Kuwait. And that, unlike the long-range pallet-on-pallet encounters in the air, is the essence of ground combat. Masses of men thrown at each other in a swirling battle that brings individuals face-to-face with war. Jim Stewart, CBS News, the Pentagon.
2 weeks into the war, Saddam Hussein is still not putting up much of a fight. Is he playing possum? He's now sending a large portion of his air force into Iran. For what reason? Unclear. This and other factors lead to the question, what is Saddam up to? Bob Schiefer went looking for some answers. Bob?
Dan, Saddam Hussein is taking a terrible pounding from the air, that's for sure, but it may be that this war is now moving in the direction he wants. Just listen to his biography.
I don't know exactly what Saddam's plans are, but his strategy has been very clear from the outset. He just sits tight, waits for the ground offensive to come in order to give the West the bloody nose.
Through the long war with Iran, Saddam followed just that strategy, letting the enemy come to him and then attacking with artillery and from well-dug-in positions.
He hasn't launched any ground offensive in the direction of the West because it doesn't serve his purpose. He's not going to launch it. He expects to be attacked so that he can kill as many Americans as he can do.
And as preparations for ground war go on, that is the worry of American policymakers, that Saddam's idea of victory could be nothing like ours. New Jersey's Bill Brantley of the Senate Intelligence Committee.
He is someone who could very well decide to take 100,000 casualties and not withdraw in order to make himself a martyr and to keep his so-called cause alive. I mean, he's a ruthless tyrant. He's a barbarous person.
Ruthless or not, if there is any good news in any of this, Dan, it is that many military experts, including our own consultant, retired Marine General George Chris, believe there may be a fatal flaw in Saddam's strategy. And what is that, General?
Oh, Bob, many say that generals spend their time preparing to fight the last war. And that's exactly what Saddam Hussein is doing. He's preparing to fight the last successful war against Iran. He's arrayed himself in the way that he did against the Iranian forces. The Iranians would attack, hit him with heavy artillery, they'd hunker down in their bunkers. Then he would stop them with these fortifications. When that was done, he would use his second line of tanks to counterattack. And finally, the Republican Guard were brought in a few days later for the counteroffensive. And that's exactly the way it's set up here.
So why won't that work this time?
Well, he's got a couple little differences. When he was fighting in the marshes of Iran, he had no open flank to the sea that amphibious forces could use. He didn't have an open western desert that armored forces could use. And furthermore, except for right in the line, these forces, these tank forces, could move unimpeded without being disrupted, and he could pick his time of attack. That's not going to be the case this time.
All right, General Chris. Dan?
General Chris, thanks. Coming up, a report on Americans in the battle zone who happen to be black, and also with the breadwinner on the war front, many Americans have a battle to keep the lights on the home front.
Freedom. And tonight, we lead the world in facing down a threat to decency and humanity.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to a special edition of CBS This Morning. I'm Paula Zahn.
The
Congress of the United States gave the men and women in the Gulf a standing ovation. That brought the tears of an Air Force nurse, Captain Diane Merritt.
Mostly when they applauded our being here, our reasons for being here, our real reasons for being here. And when he said, God bless the United States, it kind of hits home. You don't realize how much you can miss a place until you're not there anymore.
But for some here, part of the president's message rang hollow. They see economic and social problems at home being a worse threat than Saddam Hussein. Are you worried about the economy back home?
I've always been worried about it all my life. That's why I joined the Air Force. No wars, just immoral. No one should have to fight each other.
And as the president finished his message, it was sunrise, and time for another day of war. For today, Rick Davis, NBC News, Saudi Arabia.
And it may be a busy day at that hospital with the latest reports of casualties. We'll switch back to Brian.
All right, Deborah, thanks very much. We want to get more on the fighting being reported in and around that port city of Khafji. Let's go to Saudi Arabia right now in Dhahran, where Rick Davis is standing by. Rick, what do you have for us?
Well, Brad, the official figures now, 10 Marines dead. No word is yet of how many other members of the Allied forces who are fighting alongside the Marines have died or have been injured. And there are unconfirmed reports, but reliable sources say that the fighting is still going on up there, and that perhaps 2 battalions, that would be 1,000 men and 80 military vehicles, have now crossed the border or are crossing the border. The fighting has been described as hellacious. It has been said that there's never been anything like it in this war. There are now the first casualties in this conflict on the ground, and it's 10 Marines dead. Right.
Rick, are officials there still viewing it as a probe or a lure to get the U.S. to initiate a ground offensive?
It doesn't seem that would be possible anymore. It seemed that last night's action may have been a probe to a preliminary ground assault. It appears that the Iraqis are now carrying the ground war to the Americans instead of waiting for that ground war to be carried to them.
Okay, Rick Davis in Dhahran, thank you. Let's go to the Pentagon. Katie Kirk, what's new on your end?
Well, Bryant, we're actually not hearing those reports that there's continued ground fighting with that many men. I'm hearing here that there continues to be sporadic fighting in and around the port city of Khafji, but obviously in the fog of war, information trickles here to the Pentagon, sometimes rather slowly. They were able to penetrate 7 miles at Khafji, 21 miles west of the city of Khafji, and then 7 miles even further west. And that's because there has to be a buffer zone. U.S. and allied forces have set up defensive positions that far away because obviously they have to be away from their artillery range. That's why you've been hearing so much about those Marine shoot and scoot operations where they go up, fire, and then get the heck out of there.
So actually they can encroach a great deal into Saudi Arabia before encountering any allied troops, which in this case it seems is what they did.
That's right.
All right. Katie Kirk at the Pentagon, thanks so very much. Our time has just about run out. We got time just for a goodbye up to New York to Deborah Norpel and Faith Daniels, and to wish everyone a good day. For all the folks in New York and Washington, thanks so very much. Enjoy your Wednesday.